Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Alex Magaisa, and I hope you can hear me well. In these days of technology, things sometimes don't go according to plan, but I'm hoping that you can hear me well. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for spending almost 2 hours watching the documentary. I watched it twice. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I think I will be recommending it to many people, and I will be watching it again, I think, for a third time. I'd like you to welcome my two guests. I've got Camila Nielsen, who is the documentary maker, the person who is behind this fantastic work. And I've also got Hopewell Chin'ono, another fine filmmaker. He is from Zimbabwe, and he is speaking to us from Harare at the moment. We know each other well from our different fields. We have interacted in many ways. So we are going to make this as interactive and conversational as possible. And we would like you, the audience, to join us by putting through any questions, by putting through any comments that you might have for Camila and for Hopewell, and perhaps even for myself. We all have a very fairly rich history in Zimbabwe, appreciating Zimbabwean politics, Zimbabwean law, Zimbabwean social life. And we don't have all the answers, but we are going to try and discuss this in a way that will hopefully give a little bit more value to what you have already been watching for the past 2 hours. So welcome. Now, I'm going to start with a question for Camila, who is the person behind the film. I was just talking to Camila earlier, and she said, you know what? I did the documentary and my work is done. But I said, I think we've got a few more questions for you. So, Camila, if you could tell us a little bit about your journey. This is not your first time working on Zimbabwe. You've done another fantastic film in which I have an interest because I was part of that process. I think that it would be nice to tell our audience your journey in Zimbabwe as a filmmaker and what led you to do this particular documentary, President. Thank you, Camila.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, it's true that I made a film previously called Democrats, which is a documentary film also that followed the constitution-making process in Zimbabwe, which took place between 2010 and 2013, of which you were also a technical advisor to this process, Alex. So we have a bit of common experience from there. And the film Democrats, which was released in 2014, unfortunately was banned by the Zimbabwean government and the then president, Robert Mugabe, and his censorship board. It was banned as not suitable to showing to the public. That was the only reason I was given. And some of the fine lawyers, including yourself and some of the team who helped write the country's constitution, then suggested to me that we try the ban in the court system in Zimbabwe because it was actually in as you know, in contradiction to the constitution itself. The constitution had a very large Bill of Rights ensuring freedom of speech and all sorts of things, which, you know, then sort of didn't quite pan out in the sense of my documentary. And the idiosyncrasy of this was noticeable, and it was suggested that we try to unban the film for two reasons. The main reason was that, of course, a film about Zimbabweans writing their own constitution needed to be seen in Zimbabwe, whether the government liked the film or not. And also, I think that the idea from the lawyers was that if we won the case, if we lifted the ban, perhaps this film would help lift the bar of how much you could criticize a government and help maybe create a kind of a legal precedence for other filmmakers, journalists like Hopewell and other storytellers within Zimbabwe. And so we embarked on a 3-year legal battle journey, I could say, And in early 2018, we succeeded to win the court case. The High Court basically threw away the case, said there was no, there was no substance, and so we were able to release Democrats finally in Zimbabwe, which was wonderful. And on that occasion, I was doing my hearings in court in the morning, and when we were told that we had won the case, we went out for a small dinner at night in Harare to celebrate the fact that we won the case. And at that dinner, it came as a proposal to me if I thought that Democrats had not so happy ending. And we talked about, with the constitution making process, that, wow, there's a new constitution, what a wonderful film, democratic reform has hit Zimbabwe, it's all wonderful. It didn't go that way. So someone challenged me to come back and make the sequel about the upcoming presidential election, because this time for sure there would be a happy end, was the prediction. So that's, the long story about how I came to make president.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Camila, for laying out that journey. And we will come back to you to tell us a little bit more about your motivation for the president. But Hopewell, you yourself are a renowned filmmaker like Camila. You have won awards for the fantastic work that you have done as a filmmaker and as a journalist. A lot of people who are watching, some of them might know you from your recent troubles with the Zimbabwean government. But could you tell us a little bit more about your journey as a filmmaker and how that relates to what you saw in the documentary, which was done by Camila, President? What are the things that you can identify from there in terms of your own story, your own journey as a journalist, as a filmmaker? I know you did one great documentary about the 2008 election violence.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's great to speak about this particular film, because when Camila started the journey of making the film, when she came to Zimbabwe after the coup, she came to my home and we had a long chat where I'm seated right now in my study, talking about what she wanted to do. And I thought that it was a great thing to do. And unfortunately, it would have been great if the other side was included as well. She tried so hard to try and get the other side included. Many meetings, and it never materialized. But from a documentary filmmaking perspective, what she ended up doing, I think, was also a great idea, because it shows the journey that was traveled by Nelson Chamisa and the MDC. And it also shows what I liked about the film. It showed some of the misconceptions that not only Nelson Chamisa and the MDCA had, but also ourselves. You will remember that I was one of the people that thought there was going to be real change, because I never thought somebody could lower their bar than Robert Mugabe's. And I could tell from watching this new film, I remember there's a part where Nelson Chamisa talks about that it's great that Mugabe is gone. Nothing can stop us now because Mugabe is gone. It's a misconception that many of us had, actually, assuming that Robert Mugabe was the hurdle in terms of the country moving forward. But we've since discovered that, no, it wasn't Robert Mugabe. It's the whole system that is the hurdle, that if you remove one person, it doesn't mean that you can get the sort of progress that you want for the country. And the second thing that jumped out of the film for me was just how small Chamisa's budget was. And for a lot of people, they didn't realize how small it was because they saw the colorful rallies. But you can see, watching the film from the meetings, you can tell that this is a group of people that have got hope, and yet they didn't have as much money as the other side had. And
please go ahead.
I was going to say that, looking at the characters that are in the film, again, it's very fascinating to see where they are today. But I would leave that for Camila because she had a close-up with them.
Yeah, I think that leads us to a very good point, actually, Hopewell. Thank you for leaving it at that point, because I want to come back to you, Camila. So when we are watching the film, and I think the audience will probably recognize this, there is a lot that is going on, and there's a lot that has gone on in Zimbabwe and in the opposition over the last 12, 18 months. And, people might want to know, with people who have left the MDC alliance, which was, which is Nelson Chamisa's party, and he was representing as the president. But we see those people, they are still in there. They were there during the run up to the election. Were there any tensions? Was there anything that you saw, during that period that suggested that we might be where we are now in terms of the opposition? Or were things looking all nice and fine?
Well, I think, the way we edit the film, it looks like we have access to everything, and all meetings and all conversations. And we do have, we had the trust of Chamisa and his team, BT and Dr. Mansoura and whoever was in the leadership at that time. And we did film, quite a number of hours of footage that led us to tell this story. But I think I'm going to have to disappoint you a little bit in this respect in terms of the split, because I think you're all talking about the unfortunate split of the opposition that happened shortly after the election. I didn't have a sense of that as I filmed it. When we filmed the story, as Hopewell said, my original plan was to follow up on the example that we did with Democrats, where we filmed equally on the side of the opposition and the ruling party, because I felt that's the most fair and most balanced story that you can do. And honestly, that was the sort of the split that I felt was between the ruling party and the MDC alliance, and not within the party at that stage. I also think that, what Hopewell said was also my personal feeling. There was such a sense of hope and anticipation that Mugabe had gone, and now was time for real change. I don't think people were thinking too much about internal party politics at that time. I think people were thinking about the larger goal, which was for the opposition to finally take power. And this is no news to a South African audience like tonight. But this film has traveled the world and is traveling the world, and we usually contextualize it in this way, that Mugabe was seen as the big problem. And exactly, the realization that you just sort of chopped the head of the snake and the system was still intact underneath. I think that was not a surprise to the opposition. I think both Chamisa and the leadership around him was all very aware from day one we started filming that this was not going to be an easy task, that the Electoral Commission was still captured by the ruling party. And I should say also as a foreigner, as a non-Zimbabwean, that was also the position of a lot of the international community. The whole diplomacy felt that, the root cause had been dealt with, and now it was all about having a free and fair election, and democracy would just sort of ease into Harare and to the Munamatapa building as we speak. And it didn't happen. And in the hindsight, I think it's very obvious that Mugabe, being in power for 38 years, his system has permeated all levels of government. And I think to win that position of being the ruling party, to fix that was, what the opposition was focused on when I filmed them. And the split that we saw after was not something that I was aware of during the filming process. So I'm afraid I cannot really share any details on this today.
No, thank you so much, Camila. I think that what you have given us is really good. I think it's very useful to our audience. But I want to go back to Hopewell and say, so the film, to our audience, they see something that is coming up in the run-up to the election. They see what the opposition is trying to do. There was confidence in the opposition ranks, even though some were cautious, but we see that there was a lot of confidence in that. Of course, we don't quite see the other side because they didn't want to be filmed. We see some of the reaction to the challenges that were being put forward by the opposition. But I want to ask you this question, Hopewell. Do you think that this election was a good idea for Zimbabwe? Was it inevitable? In other words, after what we all saw as a coup in November 2017, and an election was only about 6 months away, was it inevitable, or could there have been another way? In other words, might Camila have been filming something else entirely different as opposed to an election preparation? Well, what's your view on what did not happen or what might have happened?
I think the appropriate route to take for Zimbabwe at that point in time was to unite the country. I thought that Emmerson Mnangagwa was going to unite the country because he had been talking about unity. And I think that watching the film for the audience that are listening right now, watching the film, you hear Chamisa saying that there's nothing that has changed. Perhaps the context that needs to be given is that even Chamisa and the MDC and Morgan Tsvangirai during the coup and just after the coup, they actually thought that the other side was going to reach out. But as we now know, the other side used an election as a consolidation method so that they could continue with the looting of public funds and the plan of the nation's natural resources, something that we thought was going to be stopped by the coup. There was hope that there was going to be a freeze on elections. There was hope that the country was going to be taken in a different direction, rebuild the country and forget about party politics and make sure that we fix the issues, because just before the coup, as a ruse to making people support it, General Chiwenga, who was then the commander of the army, was saying that this country is backward. Emmerson Mnangagwa was saying that the country is 15 years behind where it's supposed to be. So people thought that, okay, these are two guys who are at the forefront of this military intervention, as it was called then. And they thought that after the coup, they were going to bring the MDC and they were going to forge a path that was going to take the country in a way that we had never seen before, like a bit of the GNU, the Government of National Unity. The day the GNU came into being, the economic fortunes of the country and of the citizens suddenly changed. And we thought that is what was supposed to happen. But unfortunately, it didn't happen.
Thank you so much, Hopewell. Without detaining you and our audience on this, but I think that there are some little bits of things that people might want to know in terms of context. You talked about the confidence that Zimbabweans had. You talked about the confidence that even civil society had. There was a huge amount of support for the coup in Zimbabwe because many people were hopeful for the very reasons that you have mentioned, that Mugabe, if he goes, then things were going to get better. There is another important constituency, which perhaps both of you can talk about, the international community. How did it handle Zimbabwe's coup and Zimbabwe's preparations for the election? Because I think it's important to give that context to what went on in the elections in August, on July 30, 2018. Hopewell, you can start.
I think the international community, when you talk about the international community in Zimbabwe, is divided into two. If you remove the African continent, there is America and there's Britain, because Britain is the mother country in terms of the colonial history, and America is the superpower of the world. Americans were very cautious about what was happening, but they did not want to be seen as if they are the ones who are throwing spanners into what was happening. The former colonial power, Britain, was exuberant. It was actually at the forefront of preparing the international community just before the coup happened. They were preparing the international community to accept Emmerson Mnangagwa. He was sold by the Brits as a reformer. he was sold by the Brits as the kind of person who was ready to do business with the international community vis-a-vis the Western world. And he had emissaries, people around him who were very suave, they were very smooth, they were talking to the diplomats. But I know for a fact that the Americans were not sold to the idea, but they just decided to allow Britain to have its role as the former colonial power. And it did all it could, and I guess you and I, when it comes to a point where we have to write our books, there will be a lot of explosive stuff that will come out of those books. But I think the African continent was happy to see the Zimbabwean problem, as it was called then, go away. The Zimbabwean problem was characterized as Robert Mugabe had become the problem. The old men, they could not call names. They had come to accept to live with him, with his eccentric behavior. So the day that he left, they were so happy. I remember the Speaker of the South African Parliament, Miss Mbete, she actually weighed into the politics of what was happening in Zimbabwe, saying that it was important for this to happen because Mugabe wanted to put his wife, and so there was that exuberance. But I must mention to our audience that you were one of the few people who said, no, this is never going to work.
No, thank you so much, Hopewell. I would have been very embarrassed to say that myself, but thank you. You know, those were difficult times. Those were very difficult times. I think that I understand why people were hopeful, but I think that the beauty of distance allowed some of us to sort of look at things in a different way. And we were very skeptical of what was coming. And, you know, we never like to say we told you so, because it doesn't really help anyone. I think what is important is that many people have now come around to accept. But the reason why I asked that question, Camila, was because I wanted the audience to understand that even Nelson Chamisa and his team, as they were fighting, they were not just fighting an entrenched regime. They were also fighting a regime which was really backed by very powerful sources, you know, powerful forces that were willing it to succeed. But unfortunately, those things didn't happen. I want to move very quickly to August 1, 2018, because that's a very important date. And in my opinion, I may be wrong here, Hopewell, it's also a date which sort of marked even yourself as a person, your personal sort of turning point to say this is not the way to do things. But Camila, you were there. You could say if it was I love boxing, you had a ringside seat. You guys were seeing what was happening. Could you tell us a little bit more? We see what's happening in the film. People being shot. They are very distressing scenes, I must say. Some of them I had not seen that footage, and it really made me very emotional. But what could you say about that?
Okay. First, I want to say about that sequence in the film, which is quite a long sequence where we try very delicately to sort of almost in a forensic matter to lay out what happened on that day, because not many people have the full picture. What happened? You know, there was a delay in announcing the result. The international observer teams had called for a press conference at the Rainbow Towers Hotel in Harare, trying to put pressure on the Electoral Commission, SEC, to announce the results, which I think even the international observers by then knew that they already had. They're all, you know, the technicalities of Zimbabwean elections are pretty simple in the sense that there are maximum 1,000 votes to count per voting station. Correct me if I'm wrong, Hopewell, maybe a bit more in the cities, but it shouldn't take 5 days to count them. And since there's a history of rigging and there's a history of ballot boxes missing, there started to be a concern, even I'd say within the international community. And when I say even, it's because I just want to pick up on your last point, Alex. I feel that as a European filmmaker, it's something that I can speak on with some legitimacy. And I want to say that for me as a filmmaker to observe the whole election process, I really feel that the international community let the Zimbabwean people down big time on this one. There was so much hula-baloo and celebration that Mugabe was gone. you know, it didn't take a political scientist with a PhD to think, you know, that someone who's worked as his, you know, right-hand man for this many years wouldn't be a born-again Democrat overnight. From what? From where? You know, you didn't have to be a political prodigy to see that. And I wonder, as a filmmaker, you know, I know the efforts that Hopewell spoke about from especially the British ambassador. But how did the whole EU team buy that, you know, hook, line, and sinker? I feel actually, as a foreigner, as a European, as a non-Zimbabwean, I feel that it's highly problematic that we come to Zimbabwe as observer teams with some sort of authority, I don't know what, and take on the job to be observers. And then when things get muddy, or as when things get, you know, devastating, as they did on August 1st, where the military took the streets and killed 6 civilians and wounded many more, then we sort of have this sort of anxiety about really digging into what exactly happened. And we take our, you know, European passports and jump on the next plane and don't deal with the mess. And in that way, I think maybe we shouldn't even have come. Or the international community, at least in the form of election observers, have a problematic role in that sense, because they are present, and, you know, the ruling party can say, well, it was a free and fair election. There were 40 different election observer teams here from all over the world. What's the problem? So our presence, in a way, helps legitimize a regime like Mnangagwa's, and I think that's unfortunate. And I hope that will be dealt with, and I hope that our movie can help. That's why I spent a bit of time in the movie, to show that they were there, and perhaps it is not in the most flattering scene that we show, you know, the activities that they do. But I think we have some reflection and self-inquiry to do about presence in elections. Then to your question about what happened on August 1st on the street, there was the press conference at Rainbow Towers, and outside the gate there was a group of young opposition supporters. Not like it was said, it wasn't a demonstration that was organized by the MDC Alliance. There had been no application to organize a demonstration. It was merely young, agitated, and understandably angry people who felt they had a déjà vu. We wanted change, and now this is happening under our watch again, and we won't take it. And we were filming in front of the gate when the whole thing was just quiet. Actually, there was, you know, people were singing songs, and they made a small fire, which was, you know, a few newspapers and a tire. And it was something that could have been put out by the police going on the other side of the gate and simply just putting the fire out. There was no need for water cannons, but they responded to this chanting and this small fire with the water cannons, in which case the thing became volatile, stones were thrown, and then in about 10 minutes, it was all very volatile. And so I was there with my cameraman Henrik, who's, you know, a very sort of courageous guy and is a war photographer, and he sort of stood it out for a while, and so did I. But then we were tear gassed, and we suddenly heard live bullets, and that's when we decided to basically just leave the scene. So I also like to say in this question that the scene that you saw in the movie is actually a compilation of many filmmakers' footage, foreign journalists, local filmmakers, activists, people with cell phones, everybody who just, before it got too crazy, tried to document what was going on. So it's an
excellent record, Camilla. It's an excellent record. It's an excellent record for the future. Anybody who wants to understand the kind of violence that took place on that day. I mean, I had read about it. I had seen a few snippets of it here and there, but to see it all put together like that, I think gives a really vivid and horrendous picture of what happened on that day. And, you know, may the souls of those who were slain in cold blood rest in peace. Hopewell, I want to come to you because you have experience of covering election violence in Zimbabwe. One of your really profound documentaries was filming the violence that took place in 2008 and the aftermath. Now, you were watching that in the film. What can you say about the issue of violence, what you saw there? And also, maybe you can also tell us your personal experience. I've alluded to it already about what August 1 did to you, in your view about the government, the regime?
I think Robert Mugabe used violence to underpin his rule, be it during elections or in between elections. But he did it with a velvet glove, and Emmerson Mnangagwa and General Chiwenga removed the velvet glove on the 1st of August. We had never seen, under the 37 years of Robert Mugabe, the use of brutal and naked violence in front of international cameras, guns being fired, and live ammunition being used. It has never happened in the history of Zimbabwe, but it happened on the 1st of August 2018. It, I think, signaled the worries that you had raised when the coup was taking place. I remember watching one of your interviews, I think it was on the BBC, when you were saying that these are the guys that actually underpinned the violent machine for Robert Mugabe. And it was laid bare for all of us and for the rest of the world to see. In the past, people have been killed. I mean, the killing machine in ZANU-PF has always been working since the 80s with the Gukurahundi genocide and the violence of Muramba-China. Then 2008, where over 300 people were killed when Morgan Tsvangirai won the election by 73%, as Robert Mugabe said. But again, the same people who authored the coup were the people who underpinned the violence that took place in 2008. But I must say that people thought that, you know, people were tired of the Zimbabwe problem. And when I say people, I'm referring to the region, the continent, and the international community. They were tired of it. And I think we got involved in factional issues in ZANU-PF without knowing that this was a factional battle. We were sold a ruse when we were being told that, you know, things had to change. They made it sound like Robert Mugabe was the problem and that they wanted to move away from the culture of violence, and only to come back on the 1st of August. And this was not even a threat to their rule. It was just, as Camilla explained, young people who were agitated, who could have been contained by the police, but they sent out the military, they sent out gunmen who fired in front of international cameras. And I think it's a reflection of things to come. Each time they faced a problem, they resort to military violence. The same thing happened again in 2019, January, when young people again went on the streets to demonstrate against the increase of fuel price. Again, they sent military people into townships. Women were raped. People were killed. And again, there was no accountability. Even the 2018 violence that is documented in Camilla's film, there was a commission, the Motlandic Commission. It gave recommendations. People were supposed to be prosecuted. People were supposed to be compensated, those who lost their relatives or those who were injured. Nothing has happened. So it shows that at least Robert Mugabe gave a semblance of the rule of law. Although he knew what was happening, he would go and create a law. As Beatrice Mtetwa eloquently explained, that if Robert Mugabe wanted to clap you, you would go and create a law, then he will come and clap you, and you would complain, and you would say, but this is what the law says. But Emmerson Mnangagwa is completely different from Robert Mugabe. He will bulldoze his way. I myself and Fadzai Maher, the spokesperson for the main opposition in Zimbabwe, and Job Scala, the vice chairperson of the main opposition in Zimbabwe, were thrown into prison. Me and Job, we spent 20 days in prison at Chikurubi Maximum. We were charged under a law that does not exist. At least with Robert Mugabe, he would try and put some semblance of legality to his repression. But the current gang, there's no, they don't care. They really don't care what the world thinks.
Very present, very present. Thank you so much, Hopewell. I think we can, spend all night talking about the violence, the violent machine that we see in Zimbabwe. But I want to go to something that is quite fascinating, and I think maybe our audience might not have a better understanding that you, Hopewell, or Camilla, and myself might have about this animal called ZEC, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. I'm not sure what it's called in South Africa, the Independent Electoral Commission or something like that, but essentially the political referee And we saw in the film that the opposition was deeply uncomfortable with the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. The relationship was very tense from the very beginning and until the end. Now, could you tell us a little bit more, Camila, your observations with the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission? You were there when we were writing the Constitution, and you saw the battles that we had trying to make sure that there would be an independent and robust Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. We thought we had done a good job, but obviously something didn't work out quite right. Could you tell us a little bit more about ZEC? It's a work in the run-up to the 2018 elections and the aftermath. And then I'll come back to Hopewell with a similar question, but with a different angle. But please go ahead, Camila.
Yeah. Obviously, I remember when we filmed Democrats that there were long and lengthy conversations and negotiations about this chapter in the Constitution, specifically because it's a very, it's kind of where the power lies. Was it Winston Churchill who says it's not how many people vote, it's about who counts the votes. And I think that's really, also the case in terms of Zimbabwean elections. And I remember from Democrats that I was actually, as an outsider and then also, of course, as a foreigner, I was wondering, what's the problem? Why debate these things in so much detail? For instance, how many days do the commission have before they need to announce the results? I think the ruling party back then wanted to have 2 weeks, and I think the opposition was bargaining for the day after, and you ended up somewhere in between with a 5-day limit, something like that.
Yes.
Well, I will say that I obviously filming the making of the Constitution in Zimbabwe, and my interest at that time was specifically human rights, the rights of journalists like myself, the rights to freedom of speech are areas in particular that had my interest. I wasn't too keen on the chapter on the Electoral Commission back then, but I regret now that I didn't pay more attention, because it turned out to be, the Darth Vader of my new film. I can tell you this much, that we filmed with Chamisa's team for about 4 weeks before election day, and there was not one day where there wasn't a meeting amongst the leadership to address the concern that none of their requests to either have a meeting with Justice Chigumba, the chief commissioner of SEC, or any of her other commissioners. I think I have about 40 hours of footage, and I'm not exaggerating, of the opposition trying to strategize, how do we get these people to talk to us? How can we ensure some sort of transparency? Because there was no communication. And so I think even before the vote was cast and the vote was the votes were counted, there was so much mistrust that for me, it was a serious sign of something going wrong. If you have, no intention of meeting the parts, it would be like the judge only shaking hands with one captain of the football field and not the other. And so for me, it was very suspicious throughout the process. And I will say that they did an honest and very diplomatic and very sort of cool-headed attempt for weeks to get these things cleared about how many ballots were printed, where were they printed, just learning from past mistakes. But they just met a wall of concrete every time. That was my experience, and it was not how it was attended in the Constitution that was finished in 2013 for sure by you experts.
Excellent, thank you so much, Camila. Hopewell, I would want to hear your general views on the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, but I've got something more specific that our audience are not aware of. This is why we are here. We want to give some context to some of these things that we're watching. There is a guy who appears in the film who is a colleague of ours, you and I. We are contemporaries, Dr. Moyo. He is a member of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, and he speaks quite a bit, defending the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, as he must do, because that is his job. But the audience might not know that he was actually a former senior opposition official at some point. He was part of the MDC that was led by Professor Wolfman Ngube at the time, before he then jumped ship and decided that he was no longer part of the MDC, and then he became a commissioner. Now, this is not about him as a person. I just want to find out from you, and so that you can tell our audience, what is it that goes on with these regimes in terms of co-opting people onto their side? And how come these individuals almost become the spokespersons of the regime? Could you tell us a little bit more about ZEC generally, but maybe go specific about this phenomenon of people who are formerly opposition who then end up in the ruling party? What happens? What would have happened?
I think the key person in ZEC in terms of making sure that things are being done the way they're supposed to be done has been with ZEC or its various formations for over 2 decades now, Ms. Kazembe.
Joyce Kazembe.
Joyce Kazembe. And she's the trusted lieutenant by the regime. And it seems she was trusted by Robert Mugabe, and she was trusted by Emerson Mnangagwa as well. But the reason why she was trusted by Mnangagwa is that the military component has always been in charge of elections in Zimbabwe. If you look at ZEC, most of its personnel, the commissariat of ZEC is made up by ex-military people from Salai Gwani going down. And so as with everything to do with Zimbabwe, you guys, when you wrote the constitution, which was passed by the citizens of Zimbabwe in 2013, you produced an excellent document. But as usual with Zimbabwe, it's something that has never been followed to the letter. It's manipulated. People just use the constitution when it suits them to do so, but otherwise they try to avoid using the constitution, and that is no different from ZEC. And talking about the former member of the opposition and who was now speaking on behalf of ZEC, you could tell. I mean, I was laughing when I watched the film the first time. I watched the film the first time just as somebody who wants to hear the story, and then the second time when I was taking notes, and then I realized that his body language gave away that he was not an honest broker. You could tell how dismissive. Sometimes you would just laugh, you would not answer questions. I mean, as a documentary filmmaker, I found that very interesting, the way Camila managed to capture him. And it's one of those things that has become problematic in Zimbabwe, where the state understands that if it wants to project a certain image about its behavior, it will use ex-opposition members because they are supposed to be credible to the world. You and I know that a lot of powerful people tried to co-opt us into this regime, and we refused because we were looking for genuine reform and not jobs for the boys or jobs for the girls. And this regime will continue doing so, as it did with Douglas Monzora. Nobody thought that he would do what he did, but he was co-opted. And I think going forward, it's important for the citizens to understand that there are certain things that must be done for an election to happen. I was very impressed by Chamisa's grasp of how the election was going to pan out. He understood the issues. Some of his guys were overly optimistic where they were not supposed to be. I remember when I wrote my final piece before the election in July 2018, I said it was going to be impossible for the opposition to win considering the hurdles that had been thrown at them. So some of these hurdles include the fact that they were not shown and they didn't know where the ballot papers were being printed. They were supposed to have been shown. ZEC was not, as Camila's film clearly shows, ZEC was not prepared to engage with them. In other countries, at any given time, at any given point, when you are heading into an election or a month into an election, any member who is taking part, more so the main opposition leader, when they request a meeting with the electoral body, it's granted immediately. But we could tell that Chamisa was struggling to even get an audience with Justice Priscilla Chigumba. And the assumption was very correct that was made in the film by the MDC, that ZANU-PF was not bothered. That's why the Mangwana brothers could walk out of a meeting with ZEC. They knew that the outcome was predetermined. Otherwise, why would your political party send you to such an important and crucial meeting and then you simply walk out without putting your points across and even complaining? You see, it's very interesting that ZANU-PF never complained along the way, and it's very unusual for a political party not to find something they don't like in an electoral process, but ZANU-PF never complained. And I think going forward, the MDC must look at the key components of rigging. As we speak right now, rigging is taking place in Zimbabwe. The majority voters in Zimbabwe are the young people, the citizens below 35. I would say in 2019, 420,000 young people turned 18. They are now eligible to vote. But out of that 420,000, only 1,444 of them have registered. That's 0.34%, less than 1%. And they are trying to go and register every day. But there's a crisis that has been created by the regime where it's now difficult to get identity cards. And you can't register without an identity card. The two requirements to register in terms of your identification is the identity card, the national ID, or the passport. Both of them, you can't get them at the moment. And this is part of the rigging that the opposition must step up and deal with. They must confront the regime. They must go to SADC. They must go to the AU. They must make as much noise and not wait for 2023, because these young people are mobilized today. They want to register to vote, but they might not be mobilized 6 months' time. They will just give up. And that's part of the rigging. The second aspect of the rigging is that when you fail to get people to register on time, it means that the delimitation process, which figures out how many constituencies are going to be in urban areas versus the ones in rural areas, is going to be against you. That's right. The opposition is going to lose a lot of constituencies to rural areas where ZANU-PF has a grasp, but we must explain to our audience that this grasp is defined by intimidation, is defined by violence, and is defined by vote buying. And the MDCA is broke at the moment. It has been broken down by the regime using the judiciary. The money that they are supposed to be getting because they were elected into parliament, they are not getting, because Emmerson Mnangagwa knows very well that if they have access to money, they'll be able to resolve some of the issues that came out of the 2018 election. And I think the third most important point is the issue of election agents. And Camila's film captures this very well when I think it was the presidential spokesperson who was saying that everybody has to be an election agent and watch what is happening. And I think that is a realization. That was a realization on their part that they didn't have enough election agents. So we're going to have 11,000 polling stations in 2023. It means that the MDC must have 44,000 polling agents, because you must have at least 4 polling agents per polling station to keep an eye on what's happening. Why do I say so? I'll give an example of what happened in Mashonaland Central, which is rural area. The MDCA did not have polling agents sufficient to keep an eye on what was happening in Mashonaland Central. So voters were voting all day from morning, from 7 a.m. when the polling stations opened, up to say 5:30 p.m. 150,000 people, 105,000
yes.
people. Yeah, 105,000 people voted between 7 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. And then suddenly between 5:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m., ZEC said over 350,000 extra people had voted in the same province, which is mathematically impossible. But that requires the MDCA to have its own polling agents on the ground, because ZANU-PF realized that there were no polling agents and they could do what they wanted. And I think the first thing is for the MDCA, led by Nelson Chamisa, to make sure that they have enough resources. And this is not only...
Hopewell. So, sorry I don't want to cut you short, but you see, I had a question for you when we were talking about the agents, 4 agents per, and I think you're about to address it, but let me ask a pointed question. This requires money. It requires money. And where you yourself said the opposition was on a shoestring budget in 2018, as Camilla has confirmed. What can be done? Because I think that issue needs to be addressed. What can be done to make sure that democratic forces in Zimbabwe, such as the opposition, are properly capacitated? Because the ruling party has a lot of money and it gets resources even from big companies which are operating in Zimbabwe. What can be done? Because I would like you to address that a little bit more.
You're quite right, Alex. I think Zimbabweans must understand that when the MDC loses or if it wins in 2023, it's not for the benefit of MDC members alone. It's for the whole of Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe needs change. There's looting, there's plunder, there's violence, there's all sorts of things, repression, oppression. We can spend the whole night talking about the problems that Zimbabweans face today. So the citizens must capacitate the political part of their choice. You cannot constantly criticize the opposition when you as a citizen are failing to do something about it. So if you have 11,000 polling stations and you need 44,000
polling agents.
Polling agents. Let's say you pay them $10 each. That's 440,000. And if you pay them $100, that's already into millions. So where is the opposition going to get this money when they can't get their fair share of the parliamentary grants that they're supposed to get? They don't have this money. So it's important for Zimbabweans to realize that change will not come on the back of Nelson Chamisa's work without the citizens themselves doing something about it. If Zimbabweans donated $1 each, perhaps, let's be historical, ZANU-PF and ZAPU, specifically when they were still ZAPU, with Joshua Ngoma as the leader, the blacks in Zimbabwe were donating $1 each so that these parties could function. But today, Zimbabweans are not donating a penny towards the opposition. They complain that Chamisa is not doing much. But how does he work when he doesn't have the resources? How does he mobilize the required polling agents when he doesn't have the resources? And this work needs to start now. They need to be vetted. They need to be trained. You must make sure that they are incorruptible and they are competent. So it's important, I think, for Zimbabweans to realize that they also need to contribute, not only by making political slogans, but by actually putting their hands into their pockets. We have seen this, and we've talked about it with Job Scala when we were in prison. And we realized that if we did not have our professional backgrounds, our families would suffer. Because nobody comes to the table to say, oh, this one has been thrown into prison. Nobody bothers to check what's happening with your family.
People will just tweet Free Hopewell without even putting anything to see, what is he eating. Those are important points, Hopewell. But you know what? I'm concerned that this is so fascinating. I mean, we were given just an hour and we just have 6 minutes to go. I have something that I think is very important that I would love to raise for Camilla and for you, Hopewell. It's a disconcerting point. It's not a criticism of the film, but maybe a criticism of the political party, of politics generally. One of the things that was so conspicuous to me was in all the meetings that I was seeing, big meetings, whether they were official meetings of ZEC, government, or of the opposition political party, the war room, I couldn't see women there. I mean, I could see 1 or 2, but there are no women. But you know what? Zimbabwe, 51%, if not more, are women. So we have a problem in our political spaces where there is what you might say systematic exclusion of women, even in spaces that are supposed to be democratic and pro-democracy. Camila, you probably saw this during the constitution making process. You probably witnessed this during the filming of the president. What can you tell us about your observations about this dynamic? We talk about gender equality a lot, but it seems to me we don't practice it. But what's your view, please?
Well, I think there's a young student at the Teachers College. There's a scene in the film where Chamisa goes to ask a group of students, you know, and engage in dialogue with them. And there's a young student there in a red party color who stands up and actually gives the explanation within the film in a way. She says, the reason you see so few women here is because we are afraid. And I want to maybe give some attention to there's a situation now with 3 young female activists in Zimbabwe who have put their lives on the line to work for democracy. It's Joanna Morombe, the young MP, and Cecilia Anetsai, better known as the trio, who are doing political work. And if you see what's happened to them, and also I would say in the aftermath of the abuse and the torture that they've been through and the continued trumped up charges, I think they went to court for the 137th time the other day. It's not something, it's just not, literally they did go to court for 137 times within the last year for a trumped up, you know, insignificant charge. I, as a woman, would think that is part of the reason that there's so few women in politics. I think even after the courageous acts that they did, I also find that there's not a big support system for them when the regime has reacted the way they have. So if I was a young Zimbabwean woman interested in politics rather than filmmaking, I would probably hesitate myself. So I think that. And Hopewell also as an analyst and political analyst, filmmaker, and award-winning journalist has, you know, got into deep trouble just by tweeting. So I think, you know, of course there are gender issues. Of course there is a culture of politics that could change, you know, with or without the ruling party operating the way they do. But for me, I think a very big factor is the danger there is connected with being involved with politics. I would think would scare off a lot of women. But
thank you so much.
What Hopewell thinks.
Oh yeah, thank you so much, Hopewell. We only have like 2 minutes to go, but I would like to hear from you your views about the issue that Camila has just been speaking about. But also, you know, I know you're very passionate. You are always urging young people, the youth, to participate in politics, to participate in public life. We see a lot of youth, young people in the film, but also talk to the issue of young women because they are the majority anyway. What can be done to promote the involvement of young people, both men and women, but more specifically to improve the way that women are involved in politics rather than the current exclusion that we see? We don't have a lot of time, but I know you throw in very few good punches in there. Thank you.
Thank you. I think as we saw in Camila's film, The President, there was a young woman who stood up and explained the reason why young women were not coming up. So I think we need to create safe spaces for women to participate in politics and not see them as sexual objects as they have been treated in Zimbabwean politics for a very long time, going back into our liberation struggle. If you read Fei Chung's book, she talks in very graphic terms of how women were used as sexual objects by even some of our liberation icons. And this has continued up to this very day. And you find some very brave women like Fadzai Mahere, like Joanna Mamombe, Netai, and Cecilia. And you see that as they rise, they start getting attacked a lot. So I think a lot of men who are of good standing need to stand up and create safe spaces for these women to make sure that they are not seen as just objects or people who are simply there to make sure that a certain quota is fulfilled for women. And I'm glad that.
Thank you. I'm so sorry, Hopewell. I would have loved us to continue, but we have reached our allocated time. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this. I think I've passed the audition. Thank you, Camila. Thank you, Hopewell, for the very fantastic contributions that you've made. There will be another time. Thank you.